turned on too?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. I'm just finishing up from yesterday. So, pardon me while I keep sewing. You guys get here, get comfortable. Okay. Do you have some people here? Okay. Oh, that needs to get turned down. Good morning. I'm just finishing up the quilt from yesterday. I have 2 more little strips to do. So I'm going to finish those up, and then we're going to talk about binding today. Okay? So come on in, get settled. Tell us your city and state so you can be entered to win. We're going to be doing another giveaway today, as always. Okay, and I'm going to finish these couple of rows. So I didn't get finished yesterday. I ended up having a pretty bad headache and had to not sew in the afternoon, so I didn't get finished. Sorry. Of course, I left the 2 hardest strips for last too, because it's, you know, dimple. All right. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. All right, so I am going to talk to you while I finish this. So I am Teresa Coates. I'm the National Educator for Shannon Fabrics, and today we are finishing up our June Tailor Quilt As You Go quilt. So we did most of this yesterday, and I'm just finishing up the last 2 strips this morning for you, and then we're going to trim it up and we're going to bind it. So fair warning is that the binding is I want to say slow and tedious, but that makes it sound more negative than it really is. But to make it turn out well, I have to take my time. So while I'm doing that, I'd like you guys to think about all the questions that you have about sewing with Cuddle, and we'll sort of compile them, and at the end I will answer all of those questions while I'm sewing the binding, so you guys can see how the binding works. Okay, so we're going to do that at the end. We're almost ready to do it. I have 2, well, I just did 1. I've got 1 last one to do, and then we're gonna square it up. Okay, I'm gonna show you how I do that, and then I'll show you the back of this too and how that turned out, because it turned out really nice. We used the heather quartz on the back, and it turned out really beautiful. We'll also get to see how well my backing worked out when I cut it a little small yesterday. So that might be kind of might be a challenge that I haven't faced yet. We'll see. Get to do it live on Facebook. So good morning. Thanks everybody for coming back again. I appreciate it. It's always nice to have everybody here. Okay, so I take my pins. I feel like there was something else I was supposed to tell people at the beginning. Thanks for joining us. I'm here. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff. And then we're going to give away, so yesterday we gave away a kit to Kitty, I think is her name, right? Stubbleworth, I think. And so we gave a kit away yesterday, or we will, I'll send it to you. And we'll do the same today. And so at the end, we'll draw a winner, and then you'll get a batting package, okay, for whichever one you want. So we have the 2 different kinds. So this is the square and a square version. And then I have the one I'm doing now is this sophisticated strips one. So we have the 2 variations. So you'll get to pick which one you want, and then I'll send you fabric to, you know, put the whole thing together for yourself. Okay, super easy. So these are June Tailor. Somebody had asked yesterday on Instagram about where to find them, and you can find them at most quilt shops and fabric stores. So a lot of places have them. Okay, so I'm actually going to use this as my scrap paper, so I can spray base the back of that. Okay. Okay. Get that down, and then I have to do the other corner. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm just spray basting the back of this. So we use the, we didn't really talk about it yesterday, the 505 spray. So in the pattern that you get with the, which is the paper I'm using right now, when you get that, it'll tell you to pull the fabric over and then pin it down, and then you'll put your next row on, and then you'll pin it and sew it. And that works fine for cotton, but honestly for cotton or for Cuddle, I would totally recommend using the 505 spray because it holds it, you can see, really flat. So when you push it out to your next strip, it stays where you want it to be, and then it will all wash out in the wash. And somebody had asked, does it gum up your needle? and it does not. Okay, so that's one of the things about this version that I really like, is that it doesn't gum up your needle. So some of the other ones, some of the other basting sprays that are out there can make your needle all icky. This one doesn't do it. I have sewn on like a lot of quilts with it, and I've never had any issues with it at all. Okay, so just to clarify that. All right, so now I've got all of my pieces on. So I'm going to show you how it looks now. So you can see these edges are real wonky. Okay, so they're all trailing off, so I have to trim those up. I'll go back over and mark it with the brown pen, but look at the back of it. Oops. Okay, super pretty. You can see the quilting lines in it fairly well, but not super well. The great thing is that if you want to, you could actually go back over with your stiletto, which I had here somewhere. So if you go back over it with your stiletto and you take this and you can fluff up all of the stitches. And I do this, we'll do this with the binding too, is you can fluff these up and then it hides those lines even more. Okay, so they can almost disappear at that point, which is beautiful. A lot of times I prefer on this sort of thing to use a Cuddle 3, which is what this is, because it'll show your lines a lot better. So when I'm machine quilting, I'll do this. But I don't always love these little ends, and those will totally get hidden in the Luxe Cuddle. So it really is, you know, personal preference on which it is. This is flatter, so it's easier to sew for most machines. But the Luxe Cuddle will hide everything. It's always this, like, you know, back and forth thing. If you are machine like long arming, or even on your domestic and your like free motion quilting, I definitely recommend that you use a Cuddle 3 though, because it will show all of your stitches, which is what you want when you're doing all that beautiful long arming. Otherwise it hides in there and nobody gets to see how pretty it is. Okay?
A question,
yeah.
We're going to go back to the 505
yeah.
spray. And when you apply it, why do you pat it?
So the padding actually helps it to stick better. So, so what I found is that if I spray the back of the fabric and then I pat it onto the batting, it actually like makes it adhere better. So if you just push it down, it doesn't actually have the oomph to make it adhere into the batting a little bit.
Somebody yesterday called it the Cuddle Smackdown.
The Cuddle Smackdown. It's totally what it is. It's the way I get rid of any frustrations. So funny. Yeah, it's pretty hilarious when we're doing a big class of it, and we've done this, you know, lots of times. And we have a whole group of ladies, you know, we'll have 15, 20 ladies or whatever in the store. Smack, 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 smack. It's so funny. I really like watching the reaction of other shoppers when they're like, just what is happening here? Never thought Cuddle was going to be that exciting.
Do you know if Odif makes a 505 spray or a version of that that's non-aerosol?
No, no. I think it would have to be aerosol to get it to be the thin mist that we want it to be. Because when you spray it on, let's see if I can find, let me find a little scrap to spray it on the back real quick. Oh, this is, I want a dark one. Hold on half a sec. Sorry, guys. Okay. Find a scrap of fabric here. I have a few of them. So what I want to show you real quick, so I'm just going to spray the back of this just a little bit. So if you want to come in here, they'll be able to see it a little bit, because what we're trying to do is creating a little web. Okay, so it creates this little light covering of it, and that's what will stick together. So it's a little bit like creating your own double-sided fusible that you would normally iron on, and then you could stick to the other side. That's what this sort of creates, because then it will come together and stick. But then I can pull it apart. Okay, if I don't press it, if I just kind of do this, it hardly sticks at all. So if I do the smack down, then it really sticks. Okay, so there is more info. Was that helpful? Okay, good. I love this stuff, and like honestly, there are a few other brands of it, and they don't smell as nice. So this, like, you can't smell it, which is great. So it doesn't stink up the house, it doesn't stink up the sewing room or the sewing store or whatever, which is awesome. So some of the other ones are quite potent, to say the least. So yeah, so any questions, please ask them. So I'm going to come around along here. If you remember yesterday, I was marking this. So because I need to cut on this blue line, and the blue line is totally hidden now. So I'm just going to mark some places here that are along that line, and I'm going to cut it off there. Okay, so I'm going to mark this with my ruler. I'm going to make sure that it's squaring up at the corner, and then going to come across and match those those dots basically. Okay, if it's not exact, it's going to be fine. I may have to take a little bit off because I miscut my backing yesterday. Guess what? It happens to all of us. So I may have to fix that. We'll see. Okay, but for now, I'm just going to draw the line all the way around. So one of the things with working with Cuddle is doing this thing where you mark it and then cut it is actually much better. It seems time consuming, but on the other hand, I promise what happens if you don't do that is that you go back and you fix it and then you fix it and then you fix it because you did it wrong. And it's not really your fault. It happens to me all the time. That's why I'm telling you. Oh, look at that. Poop. We got a little hole in there. Okay. All right, here we go. We're fixing things, guys. Okay. So you have two options here. All right, so I'm going to fix this. I'm going to shove this under there and I'm going to stitch it as well as I can. I think I can pull this back well enough to stitch under there. But you have two options when this happens is you can take it out. I am 1, 2, 3, 4 seams from the end. So this is something that I should have caught when I first sewed this on, but I didn't check it well enough and didn't catch it. So I could take it all out and get back to here and then re-sew that down. I'm going to try to fudge it and see if that works. The other thing that you can do, and I've totally done this on blankets, is that this part, I will actually cut it here instead of here. So I'll just chop an inch off of it because this is going to be in my seam allowance. And then I just make the blanket smaller. Okay, so it really depends on what you want to do. But those are some options. So today I'm going to show you how to use the blade to take stitches out. So all I do is I come under here and I'm just going to see if I can catch the stitches. There they are. Okay. So there we go. So now I've got some stitches out and I'm going to stitch this down. Okay. And this is going to take some finagling. It's going to be real weird in the machine, just so you know. It's so funny because I just did this morning and I was like, oh, make sure you check that. And then did I? No, I did not. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over just slightly so if I sew 1/4 of an inch here, it's going to catch it. Okay, so we'll see how far I can get under here. I didn't take it out too far because I can't get too far in there. Okay, the other thing that you can do that I've totally seen people do in classes is that they just top stitch it. And that works too. All right, let's see what we can do. You can stay over there because I'll be back in just a second. Yeah. Or just see, you can watch me sweat because it's warm today in Los Angeles and then this wasn't supposed to happen. Okay. Yeah, what is supposed to be 90 something today, I think. So it's already warm in here. I don't know if you guys can tell, but we get lots of sunshine and yeah, it's warm. Okay, so I've got this under the machine and I'm just going to sew this a little bit bigger seam allowance than I had before and hope for the best. So this is where I will try to fix this once, and if it doesn't work, then I'm going to be like, yeah, we're just going to take that off the edge and make it a smaller blanket. I'm usually willing to try to fix things one time, and then that's about it. If anybody knows me at all, they know I really hate unsewing, so yeah. All right, let's see. Did I catch it? I did. All right. Ta-da! We saved it. We saved the blanket. All right. I love that you guys get to come along and see all my little mistakes. See, it's not all perfection. All right, so now, again, I can look under here and be like, oh, that's where it was. You can see I'm just sort of eyeballing it. It does not need to be perfect. One of the things that I really like about working with Cuddle is that perfection is not the goal. It's just that it's soft and yummy. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to move this along and try to keep it as flat as possible as I'm going here.
That Sharpie marker is not going to bleed because it's all inside of the seam allowance, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and Sharpie is really good about actually like not bleeding. But this will be at the edge. I'm going to cut it off. And even what's left on there is fine. I'm using the dark binding, so it won't show through the binding. Yeah, works great. And we use Sharpies a lot when I'm doing stuff because it works really well, and I've never had it bleed and show up anywhere I didn't want it to. I've never had it bleed, so it doesn't show up where I don't want it to. Okay, so now we got the last, looks like the last one. See if I can get this. All right. Okay, so now I've got it marked. I'm going to make sure that I've got it marked all the way to here. Corner, corner. Yep, okay, I got it all. So now I'm going to cut it off, okay? So if you've been here before, you know I really love this blade. It's what I use for a lot of things. It's what I use for cutting all the bindings that we'll do today. Okay, it's a great little tool. It's the SAC-1 Digital Artist Snap-Off Stainless Steel Blade. It's got a big long name. What? What? Okay. Got it. I really like them a lot. So that's what I use for everything when I'm doing like cutting luxe cuddles. And when I'm normally cutting quilt stuff, I will do that even when it's luxe cuddles. But we're not going to do that because we just need to get it cut off. Okay. So sometimes it's just a variation on when I use it. But see, I'm cutting the back. So if you saw yesterday when I cut it and it had all the hair hanging off the side, this is what happens is it cuts it all off. Okay, so we're going to make a mess and then I'm going to vacuum again. Because all of that backing is luxe cuddle, which means it's going to be messy. Okay. So the biggest key with that is not, so you'll notice as I move it that I don't do a lot of picking up and shifting. I'll do this stuff where I shove things around a little bit because the more you lift it and drop it, the more that stuff falls off. Okay, and I don't enjoy the luxe cuddle mess, so I try to keep it to a minimum. All right, okay, so this is where it's going to be real close because I was not careful. Okay, ooh, so messy. All right, I'll try to keep it on the cutting board if I can. Okay, so this is why I mark it first, is because there's no way with this fabric being so like that I could actually get it flat out onto the table. I mean, I guess if I moved everything off my table, I do have enough space, but most of us don't in our sewing room. We don't have enough place to lay this out flat, which means that those sides are not going to get cut flat or straight. So if I mark it first, it's a lot easier, and I can see if I got it a little bit crooked by looking at it without having to straighten it up time and time again. Which is what used to happen to me until I just decided I would mark them first. Okay, this is different than when I'm working with like the strip quilts, and I'll do that on the side, but on the bottom I actually use the ruler to try to figure out straightness. If you watch any of the videos, I talk about that. Okay, here we go, moving it again. Okay, all right. Okay, so another corner. I'm going to do this. We'll just keep moving it around until we get this whole thing straightened up.
Very nice.
Do you want to try to shut it? Okay. We have a leaf blowing, it sounds like, outside. So, sorry. So I'm just going to pull and shimmy this. So one of the things that when you're working with it, sometimes it likes to move, and so I can see like my line isn't straight here, and I'm not going to try to make that straight. I'm just going to shimmy this until I see that this is flat, and I'm just going to cut it there. Okay, so don't worry too much. It's a little bit like those, like the raw edges, and that you don't necessarily need to get those perfectly straight when you're sewing the seam. You just want to get it so that it's a straight line, and this is the same idea. Okay. Whoa. So much fun. Okay. Okay, you can see it just goes everywhere. So I tell you guys, one of the first things that I did, which we should actually show sometime, is that the wolf quilt that I did, and I made it all out of luxe cuddles. And anyway, when I was learning how to cut the fabric, and this is where I came up with the blade, and but I was learning how to cut it, and I was cutting it with a rotary cutter, and because I'm like traditionally a quilter, normally if there's stuff on your mat, you just blow it off. Like there's just extra threads, you just blow it. And so that's what I did, was I just blew on the Luxe Cuddle to get it off my cutting mat. It's not a good idea. All that does is fluff it right up into the air, and then it just circulates up there for a while before it slowly makes its way down. So I learned the hard way. Don't make too much air. Don't use a fan right on your table. Yeah, all of that stuff. Okay. All right, so Hawk, can you help me get the vacuum? Okay. And then I'm going to see if I can leave that. I'm going to chuck this to the side so it's out of the way. Did you see me move it right in front of the fan there, Hawk? Yeah, that was... I chuck mine, but I know a lot of people save them. I know, sorry. But I know a lot of people use them for dog beds. They make dog beds out of them. Yeah. All right, good enough. Oh. It's a Black & Decker. It's been well loved, so pardon it's well usedness looking. But I've had it for almost 4 years now, and it works great. So it's a Black & Decker. It has a big number on it. The thing that you want to look for, though, this is the reason I use this one, is because the air comes out the back side. So a lot of vacuums, the air comes, the vents are like on the side, and when that happens, when you're doing the vacuuming this off, it's blowing the air here, and it blows your Cuddle dust around more and doesn't actually clean it up as well. So the one that the air comes out the other side is what you want. Okay, that's the one that I found. They have a couple of versions of that. That's the older version. I have a newer version that I think I forgot at a store when I was doing a class once. But they have a couple of versions. Just make sure that the air is being pushed out the backside. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give this a little shake down here. So I always like to shake, you'll notice that I kind of take it off here and shake it because it'll drop to the floor faster and stays out of the air. Okay. All right. So now we've got this. So I'm going to check the back and make sure that all of my edges are covered. And it looks like I did okay. Oh, see, this is where it's a tiny bit short. You guys see that right there? I told you I was going to try, and it's real close. Okay. But the way the Cuddle works, it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance that I'm going to use. So I'm totally fine. It looks like this is probably about the biggest, and it's maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. So I should be fine. Okay. Oh, there's one up there too. So at this point, I'm going to sew the binding on. You can, if you want to, you can stitch around it. I know a lot of people, I do this actually when I do cotton quilts, is that I take it to the serger and I serge all the way around the quilt when I do the binding. I don't do it with the Cuddle quilts. If I'm not going to bind it right away, a lot of times I'll just go around and do a straight stitch or a zigzag around all 4 edges. We're just going to do the binding today, so I don't need to sort of adhere it. But make sure, especially when you come to these corners, because these corners can come loose, okay, where the backing has come off. So when this happens, I'm just going to spray this again, the little bit of spray right here up at the corner, and get it to tack down again. Okay, perfectly normal, doesn't mean you did anything wrong, it just will come loose over time. So we'll adhere it again, and now when we sew it, we won't have to worry about that coming out or moving, because that's what happens, is that moves again, like happened yesterday where things get caught up underneath. Luckily we didn't sew it yesterday, so caught it early enough. Okay, so any questions on squaring up? We're good? Everybody's got that? Okay, so we've got our quilt squared up. It's going to be the same way for whatever quilt that you do. So now we've got the binding, and I'm going to show you how to do the binding. I'm going to show you with Cuddle and with Luxe Cuddle, if I can find my just regular Cuddle piece. I don't know what I did with it. I'm going to have to find it again. So these are my Luxe Cuddle pieces that I cut. So the binding, oh, thank you. The binding is done. We're going to do it with Luxe Cuddle for this whole thing, which I think will be really pretty, and it's the same like chocolate as this. So I prefer to do my, yeah, I think it's going to be really nice. Da, da, da. I prefer to do my bindings out of Luxe Cuddle because it hides the stitches better. The other one you saw, I did it out of regular Cuddle 3. So I'll show you how I do that. We'll work through that, but I'll also show you how to do it with the Luxe Cuddle. And that's what I'm going to do the most of it for, is that. So first I'm going to show you with the Cuddle 3 because I'm actually going to sew it on and then take it off. Sorry. Okay. So Cuddle binding, I'm going to get my drink. We got one today. Cuddle binding is, we sew it to the back and bring it around to the front. So like if you machine bind cotton quilts. That's typically the way we do it. We'll stitch the back, bring it to the front, and then machine stitch it down. When we're doing it with the Luxe Cuddle, it's going to be the same way. If you're doing it the other way and you're trying to stitch it to the back side, what ends up happening is that you're top stitching from this side, which means this side isn't going to look as nice. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean. We're just going to do this little piece first, and then like I said, we'll take it out and I'll do the real one. But I want to show you with this first and show you how I figure out the serpentine stitch, okay? Because that's my favorite. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this on, and I'm going to clip it to the back because then I'm going to bring it to the front, all right? So right now I'm just showing you the process of sewing the binding on. We'll talk about how to start it and all that stuff when I do the other one. But I want to show you how that works with the Cuddle 3 because it isn't the one that I prefer, but a lot of people do, and it is easier on a lot of machines because it's not as thick. Okay, so if your machine struggles at all, this is the one to do. And then you have some variations on what you can do. All right, okay, so do you want to watch from there or come around?
Let's come around.
All right, let's do it. Okay. I managed to spill my water on the quilt. Thankfully, it's polyester and it's just coming right off. Okay, so first I'm going to put a pin up here. Get a different pin. Threw that one right on the ground. Okay, so I'm going to get a pin so I can put this underneath the digital dual feed back there because the Wonder Clip won't fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to run it right along here. Okay. And I'm going to, I have it on a 3-stitch length, a straight stitch, and I'm just going to run it right along here. I have, hold on half a second. So this is a great little tool. Actually, I'm going to move this for half a sec. So this guy is just a little tool I got from somewhere. Oh, it was from Market because it's like, you can get your name printed on here. So here's the little hole for the 1/2 inch. So what I can do is I can come in here. You find the little hole, okay? So now when I put my foot down, I can see the 1/2 inch. So if you come up just a little bit, you can see over the top of the foot. So my 1/2 inch is actually just past this line, but I like to shoot for this line or a little bit before. So it's like more than a scant 1/2 inch. It's kind of a really light 1/2 inch, but it's more than 3/8. So it's right here is where I do it, and this seems to work really well for me. So find your 1/2 inch and then do it slightly smaller than that, and I found that that works best. So a lot of people shoot for 3/8, and that seems to work pretty darn well, especially with the Luxe Cuddles, okay? So, but having a ruler like that actually helps a lot because sometimes the measurements on your machine aren't exactly accurate. No offense to any of the machine manufacturers. Okay. So I'm going to stitch along here, and today I'm just going to use a gray thread for all of this, mostly so you can see it. So if I were doing this for reels, for a quilt that I was going to give to somebody, I would have changed my thread probably just to a black because I don't carry a ton of different colors. I just try to keep them more minimal, and the black will hide in this just fine. But today we have medium gray, because that's what I sew on most of the time. Okay. Okay, so now I've got this whole section that I've sewn together. So you can see this is about the length of stitch that you want. Okay, so this is just a nice sort of a top stitching look. Works super well and it holds on just fine. So then we're going to take this and we're going to turn it over. I'm going to stab myself and I'm going to turn this just like this. All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm turning this raw edge just past the stitching line. So you guys can see the stitching line there. Okay. I want this to come just past it. Okay. So I'm going to put it there and then I'm going to clip it. Okay, the trick is to keep it along that line, and that's the hard / important part. Okay, it's definitely the part that people struggle with the most when they're doing the binding, is getting that along that edge. So if you do a slightly smaller seam allowance and then just take your time with this, you'll do all right. So I'm going to get this under. Okay, all right. So now we're just going to do some just stitches, and I'm going to take it out for us as we go, but I just want to sort of experiment alongside you so you can sort of see the difference of what you can do. Okay, so first what I recommend is a zigzag, is what I like to do for a lot of things. It's just the 5 and 5 zigzag, so it's 5 wide, 5 long. Basically I say just as wide as your machine will go, but some of the newer machines will go up to 9 and you don't really want it that wide, so 5 and 5 is good. Okay, as normally I would zigzag this, and I would want to go so that when my left side zigzag comes down, it's going to be right on the side of that fabric. Okay, and so I've gotten it in place to where I want it to be. When it comes down, you're going to see it's going to come right off. Come up just a little bit so you can see in there just a little. So right in here, this is where my fabric ends. My needle's coming right down on the very edge of it. Okay, and then when it comes over, it's going to go over there. Okay, so I'm going to just stitch a little bit like this. Okay, so that needle is just coming down just off the edge there. The other stitch that we can do, let me see if I can find it, is not that one. It always takes me a second to find it, and I don't know why, because I use it a lot, but where is it? It's the serpentine stitch. There it is. Okay. Was there a question?
Yeah, what was the width of the binding fabric?
Oh, the width of the binding is 1 3/4 inches. Sorry. Yeah, it's 1 3/4 inches. Is what that is. And I usually cut that like slightly heavy, so the line on my ruler is just off to the side. But 1 3/4 is what it is. If you do it 2, it ends up being too big and you get like a weird flap thing. Okay, so the my serpentine stitch, so come over here and show them this. So this is your serpentine stitch. Not everybody knows what it is, and it's basically this big S curve. Okay, most machines will have it. It's a pretty universal stitch to have on your machine. Okay, so this one is, it tells me the length is 1 millimeter, the width is 5. So if I lengthen that, it gets more SE. Okay, so let's try it at 1.6 and 5 wide and see what happens. All right, so this is actually the way that I do it, is I just try to figure it out. Is this what I like? Okay, and it's the same way in that most of the stitching is over here on the binding, and I'm trying to keep that edge right on the stitching line so that when it comes over, it's going to come just off that stitching line. All right, and this is why I love this stiletto so much, is because I can go in here and I can grab it and I can hold it where I want it to be. And it's the by Annie stiletto. So if you've watched me at all, you know I sew with this thing all the time. Binding is definitely the one place that I'm like, oh yeah, this is necessary. Okay, so I'm just going to hold it like this. And now I'm going to open it, make it even longer. And see if we can show you that one. Yeah, and you can see how much faster that moves. Okay. But what I found is that they look different. So what I recommend to you is that you're going to take this and you're going to try it on something other than your finished quilt, okay? And see what it looks like. So this is the zigzag, which works fine, and here is the serpentine, which gives it a totally different look. The longer one is definitely longer, so this is the length of that serpentine here, where this is the length of the serpentine here. Okay, so this one definitely got longer. I actually prefer this length just because I feel like I'll catch more down, and if it goes too fast, it's hard to keep control over this edge and keep it nice. The goal is that these two are going to overlap, okay, so that my stitches are on here and not over here. So like I said, it's the goal. You're going to practice for a while before you get to that point that it will actually work. But you can also see that this is gray thread way in there. But you know, you have to look real hard. So even with the medium gray thread, it totally doesn't show. And I mean, you can see it's really light thread, but it totally just hides in there because of the nap. Okay. Super great. All right. So now let's take it out. That's fun.
You don't fold that. You don't fold that over.
You do not fold it under. That is just the raw edge. Yep, just the raw edge. And the reason that we do that is because it's a knit, or the reason we can do that is because it's a knit. So because it's a knit, it's not going to fray at all. And so it's just going to sit there right along that edge. You can wash it, dry it. It's not going to do anything. Okay, and that's because it's a knit. All right, so it's one of the perks of it. Also, for taking stuff out. So sometimes this will happen where I accidentally cut the fabric, and that's because I'm not being super careful. So usually it's when I start getting like, I gotta hurry, and then I'll cut my fabric a little. But usually I can salvage it. But it works pretty darn well. So that's how you would bind on Cuddle 3. Like I said, make sure that you use, so get like a little scrap and just bind on the edge of a scrap and actually do the serpentine stitch and see how it works. Practice that a little. When some of the classes that I've done, we've done like 15-inch blankets where we just put 2 pieces of 15-inch squares of Cuddle together and then bind it, and that lets you practice that. It lets you practice the corners without doing it on a finished quilt that you spent all this time making, and then when you do the binding, it's frustrating and hard. That's not what we want. So practice the binding. It's honestly how I did most of my practicing, is that I actually did a blanket that was like a larger one. I think I started at like 20 by 20 inches square. So I started with a bigger, probably about 20 inches square, where I did 2 pieces of the Cuddle together, and I actually put the batting in there because I wanted to have that whole feel to it, because that's how I would do my blankets. And then I bound it, and then it was terrible, so I cut it off, and I did another one, and then I cut it off, and I did another one. And so I ended up doing it till it got down to a smaller square, and then it was like I was done. I'd probably done 4 or 5 of them at that point. But it gave me a practice of doing that with something that I wasn't wasting the whole project on, because the binding is something that just takes a little bit of practice, okay? So don't be too hard on yourself when you do it the first time and you're like, oh, that looks terrible. It's just because it takes practice, okay? So also some of these tips that I'm telling you about. All right, so now let's do it with the real binding. All right, so this one I used the Luxe Cuddle Hide Chocolate is what I used. And we're gonna sew our binding pieces. We do them with the fabric. So, I got water on the table there. Okay, so they're with the fabric, which is 60 inches, because Cuddle 3, or Luxe Cuddle is 60 inches wide. I cut these with the Luxe, or the blade, so you can see these edges are not super neat, okay, because they come like this because it didn't cut off the nap. If you look at the other side, they're perfectly straight. All right, so don't let that confuse you too much, because they are actually straight pieces. What I did is I measured them first with my ruler, and I marked them with a silver pen, and then I cut them. Okay, so I've got my pieces. These are 1 3/4, 1 3/4, and I'm going to overlap them like this. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin them. So this is just like a traditional quilt binding. Okay, so if you do it with cotton, this is how you're going to do it, is lay it in this order and stitch across. Okay, so now I'm going to do from one corner to the other. And I'm going to mark this just so you guys can see what I'm doing. And it works pretty darn well. Okay, so that's my sew line. So the reason that I pin it like this is so that I can leave these pins in while I'm sewing. So I'm going to sew this, leave the pins in so this doesn't shift at all. Then I'll take my pins out when it's right. Okay, so we're going to do this one, and then I have 4 that I'm going to sew together. So here's one. Here's the other one. The Luxe Cuddle, this does actually have a nap, but it's really hard to tell. So for things like this, I just pretend they don't have a nap. When you're sewing with, it's a terrible end. I'm just going to put that up a little. Oh, I remember. Sorry, that was like a little scrap part of my piece. And when I do these, I'm just going to let them overlap. Okay, so I let a whole bunch hang out on either side. I leave the selvages. I don't worry about that at all. When we're done, we'll trim off that corner. Or yeah, we'll trim off the corner, which will take all of that off. Okay, but for now, if I have a little bit more on, it's a little bit easier. Okay, speaking of easier, I should have a smaller ruler. Big 24-incher right here. It's not the easiest, but we'll manage. Okay, so there's 2. Let me find the other one. Oh, we have a little ruler. Thank you, Hawk. Okay, so now here's my other tail end. Okay, and then I have one more that I'm gonna put on here. So we have 3 seams that we're gonna do. So you can see here's my seam allowance, and I'm just gonna let that be up there. The ends tend to get a little wonky anyway, so like where I cut them, so I just let them be out there. It doesn't matter, we're not trying to save every inch of fabric. Okay, and you can throw that in your dog bed pile if you're making dog beds. I think it's probably been almost every other class that somebody is making dog beds, and they collect all the scraps. So
it's a silver Sharpie.
Yes, yep, it's a silver Sharpie, so it writes on the dark fabric better. I could use black, but it's easier to see it this way, especially for you guys. All right, so now I'm just going to sew these together, and I am actually going to backstitch these. So normally I don't really backstitch, and but on this situation I need to. Oopsie, my pin's coming out. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to change my stitch to a straight stitch, and I'm actually going to put my needle down, because when I do that I can come up here and I can bump this against my needle, and I know that's where I want to start sewing. Okay, so I'm going to sew in just a little. Oh, did I come unthreaded? I did. Oh no, here it comes, you guys. Teresa trying to thread because she still doesn't have her thing fixed. The threader. Oh, and it stuck to my hand. Sorry, guys. That's the hardest part, is grabbing the thread from behind and try to make sure it doesn't come back through. I swear, that's where I lose it. Okay, all right, let's try it again. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stitch forward, stitch backward, stitch all the way across. Okay, you can see I've put my pins far enough apart that I'm not going to hit them at all, and so they're totally fine to leave there. Okay, so once I'm done here, I'm going to take this out, take this pin, I'll check it. That looks like a pretty straight line across here, so we'll be fine. Okay, so then I'll sew the other 2, and then we'll trim them all up. Okay, so the biggest thing in here is to make sure that these are laying flat as you get them in there, and that this is going to go straight across. Okay, so needle down, bump that up there, and then do it again. Okay, and then we'll do one more. Lift up my foot, put down my needle, bump it up, move it over just a tiny. All right. So it's sort of like chain piecing. All right, so now we should have all of these working. So give this a try. This one's pretty good. It's slightly off, but I'm going to let it be. If I decided that I wanted to fix one of these, which these are all close enough that I'm going to leave them. But if you get it so it's wonky, it's so kind of funny, or you open this and, you know, if you're a quilter, you know, and you'll have one that's like conk down here, what you'll do is just put this back together, re-sew it. So if your line is crooked or you started down here, just re-sew it in the right place and then take out that original line. Okay, that's the easiest way of doing that. All right, so now we're just going to trim these little tails off. And I trim them to about 1/2 inch. Okay, I just sort of eyeball it and cut them off. You want them to be a little bit longer. I thought, because I'm always trying to figure out like easier ways of working with this stuff, and I thought that maybe if you made it really small, it would be better because it's not going to fray or anything. But what happens is if you cut it smaller than 1/4 of an inch, it will end up just curling on you because it's a knit. And so then you get these weird little ridges in here. So I found that 1/2 an inch will lay really nicely. So that's what I do. Okay. So just cut those little corners off. It's going to work totally fine. All right. So in between here and all of these guys, you can take them. Try to see if there's one that was particularly bad, and they're not. But this one you can actually come back in here with your little stiletto and pull those fibers out of there, and it'll make those seam joins sort of go away. Okay. So you notice it a little bit less. All right. So that's something that you can do to sort of get this to all hide together. Hide. It's hide fabric. Okay, sorry. All right, so now I've got my binding. I have 4 lengths that are 60 inches. So it's what, 240, is that what that is? And my quilt is 40 by 50. So I'll have plenty of binding, and I might have more than enough. That happens a lot in our kits, is we'll tell you to cut 4 strips that are 1 3/4 by width of fabric, but you really kind of need 3 if you cut it to the right size, or if you cut it a little small. But we give you more just because.
Cut in relation to the stretch at all? You know, because like some of the Cuddle stretches one way, or some Cuddle stretches 2 ways.
No, I don't do it any differently. I just use the rotary cutter for that, or scissors, and just whack it off. Yeah, it's totally fine. The binding is always going to be cut with the fabric because that's stretchy. So if that's what you mean, that's what that'll be. So you're always going to cut with the fabric. One, it's 60 inches, so it's really long and wide, but it also means that we don't have to cut it on the bias. So for traditional quilt binding, we cut it on the bias, so it has some stretch, and can get around corners and that sort of thing. This has stretch in it already. So it's one thing that you want to make sure that you're not doing is stretching it as you sew it too. So yes, always the width of fabric, 1 3/4 inches by width, sew them together, you have a big long length. Okay, so the other thing, so I have these clips too. These are the Jumbo Wonder Clips. Okay, these are also clover, and so they're really just the bigger version of the little guys, and they're a much bigger version of the little guys. So these guys are huge, and I really like them for doing my binding. So we're going to use those for this part of the binding. All right, and I just use a few at a time. So what we're going to do is we've got our quilt, and we've got our binding. I'm going to start somewhere on the side, and then just hope I don't get any of those seams at a corner like I did with the last one. Because it's just a matter of luck at that point. So what I like to do is I like to pin one down. So I'm just starting somewhere randomly on the side. Okay, it doesn't matter. I don't want to start too close to a corner because that'll be difficult when I come back and have to put the tails together. So if I start here, it means I'll be putting my tails together in this section, which is totally fine. So I'm going to clip this down, or pin it. Okay, the reason I pin it is just to keep it out of the way. Okay, no reason otherwise, I'm just pinning it out of the way. Then about 8 or 10 inches up, I'm going to put another pin in here. Okay, and this is where I'm going to start sewing. All right, so I'm going to put a pin here, and then I'm going to put some clips. Okay, when I'm sewing, and you might have noticed this on the Cuddle 3, is it kind of grows a little bit as I'm going, and that's because I'm not doing the double pinning, and it's okay as long as it only grows a little bit. Okay, if it grows too much, you're in trouble and you're stretching it. We don't want that. Okay, and that can happen if you're not using a walking foot. So this is a place that's really important that we use that walking foot. All right, so let's start sewing. Okay, we'll see how fast I can get around this. So this would be the time when you have questions there, and then Hawk can throw them at me, and I'll answer questions for you. All right? Okay, so I'm gonna scoot over. Hold on. Okay. It's best if you use the right tip of the stiletto. Okay. All right, and I'm still using this third line on my foot. If you are using a traditional walking foot, let me see if mine is right there. Oh, there it is. Hold on, trying to reach around, grab it. There we go. All right, so if you're using a regular walking foot on your machine, the edge of this is usually about 1/2 an inch. So what I do is when I'm sewing this, can you see that okay? what I will do is I will make it so that the fabric hangs out just the side like this. So I can just see that raw edge popping out the side. If it gets over here, you're in trouble and your seam allowance is too small. If it's over here, you're in trouble because your seam allowance is too big. So it needs to come just right along that edge, okay? So that's the way most the walking feet, the Bernina works this way. This is just a generic walking foot for, that works for my featherweight and for my foff. I have a vintage foff, not a new foff. They have a whole other system. Okay. All right, so I need to scoot over in front of it just a little bit more just so I can see what I'm doing better. All right, so now I'm just gonna stitch right along here. Okay, and I'm gonna take these out as I go. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold this down and just guide it along that line. So really what I'm looking at here is this edge, okay? And I'm just trying to aim that toward the line that I want it to be on, because it's really easy to lose track of it. So you can see this is starting to push up just a little bit. I'm actually not gonna worry about that because that's not enough stretch to become an issue. Because I can sort of feed it in. And it's one of the things that will happen a little bit more with the luxe cuddles. So if you are having it really feed, like if it's starting to get like this, it's stretching, okay? It should only push up just a little bit, and it's because the luxe cuddle is so thick. Okay, so we're just gonna come right along here. And now that's my last clip that I did. Okay, so I'm going to stop and I'm gonna re-clip. So I don't clip all the way around, I don't pin all the way around because it's gonna keep moving. And so I just do a little bit at a time. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that I've caught all of the layers in there. Okay, so now I can take this guy out because the next part is pinned. And I'm just going to keep sewing.
Walking foot and the digital dual feed.
Yeah, the way that it works is completely different. So the walking foot, it has little, you can't really see it here, but these are like feed dogs in here. These are rough. Okay, so these grab the fabric and then it sort of picks, so it pushes it here and then it pushes it backwards and then they lift up and come back around and then they push the fabric backward and come back and do that whole thing at the same time as the feed dogs underneath are doing that. So these are, it's basically like feed dogs on either side. The digital dual feed, I don't know if you can see this, if Hawk can get back behind there, but it's actually a little, gosh, I never remember what those things are called. What is it called?
Conveyor belt.
Well, it's like, yeah, it's like a little belt.
Tank treads?
Yeah, it's tank treads. It's a little belt back there that actually drags it through. And I wasn't really sure how well that would work, but it actually works super duper well. Okay, so I think it's a fabulous little tool. And you can actually, this little guy here makes it so that the tread works or it doesn't. There's also a little plug-in in the back that sometimes I forget to do, and that makes it engage. Okay. All right. So yeah, there's definitely a difference in how they work. Both work very well. Okay. So the Bernina I have has a walking foot, and this one has the digital dual feed. And then, like I said, I have a universal there that I can use for my featherweight and my foff. Okay. So here, what I'm going to do is I need to find about a 1/2 inch. I can eyeball it because I've done it a million times. Okay. So that's about where my 1/2 inch is. So I'm going to stop there. Went one step too far, darn it. Okay. And then I'm going to turn it and I'm going to sew right off the corner. Okay, so here's the corner of my quilt right here. And I'm sewing right off the corner. This works for traditional quilt making, like with cotton. So if you haven't learned this one yet, this is a great tool to learn for quilt making in general. All right, so now we're just going to move just a little bit so I can show you this. Okay, so here's my stitching line all the way down, okay, and then I turned off at the corner. All right, so at this point, so this is easy to remember. At this point, what you're going to do is you're going to pull it up so that basically it's coming straight up the side of your quilt, okay, and then I hold a finger here and bring it back. Okay, and then it's going to come back down right alongside your quilt because it was going straight up. If we fold it straight back, it's going to be in the right place. Okay, at that point you can see I'm not going to let go because I don't want it to move. So the first thing I do is pin this side over here. Okay, these should be 2 raw edges together. So there's my 2 raw edges. Okay, and then over here, I want these to stay. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that right about here. So when I stick this in the machine, it hasn't really moved. Okay, so I don't use clips right here. I use pins because I really want it to stay. One of the tricks here is that this little fold needs to be so that I can see the raw edge. Okay, so you can see that raw edge poking out. I need to see that when I'm looking straight down, I'll see that. And that's really important because if you end up with that fold over here, what ends up happening is you give yourself a little pocket at the corner, and we don't want that. So make sure that that's pulled nice and flat. Okay, and then we're going to stick this back in and start sewing again. So I'm going to put a couple little clips in before I move it to the machine. And then we'll keep going. Okay, so the corners are actually pretty darn easy. And the great thing about the mitered corners with the Cuddle, you can see how I've pinned here. So I pin here, I pin here. I'm going to start sewing here. So that's really important, is that this is going to become the miter that flips around. Okay, just going to show you guys really quick. This is actually a place people get confused a lot. Okay, so this is going to stay loose because this is going to have to come back over the corner. All right, so when you do that, make sure that you have these pinned here, but you're sewing here. Okay, we're just sewing down the next side. Okay, so I'm going to get that put under there. And I'm going to get it all the way underneath the foot. I don't have to start right at the fold. If I start right at that fold, it's going to give me some hassle. And it even might give me a little bit of hassle right here. So I'm going to keep my stiletto here so that I can sort of get it to go forward a little. And just give it a little bit of a nudge so it can work itself in and through. Okay. All right. More questions? Throw them at me, guys. I got to do this for a while. There's a lot of binding to do. Okay, I'm happy to answer all of the questions. Somebody had asked something else yesterday that I was going to mention. Let me think about it. So yeah, the binding is really, it's important. Oh, somebody had asked if they could do a blanket with the Luxe Cuddle binding and embrace, which is our double gauze, and 100%. So this binding, if you can practice this and get good at it, you can do all sorts of things. And putting 3 layers of embrace together with a Luxe Cuddle binding is actually really, really beautiful. It's a super easy, fast blanket that will kind of amaze people because you worked with such fancy fabrics and it's so soft. Yeah, Cuddle is great because you can really impress people with them thinking that, you know, somehow you did something to make that fabric extra soft, but you didn't. It just comes this way. It's beautiful. Okay, so we're just going to plot along here, and I'm going to put some more little clips in so we can have them ready as I go. All right. Oh, we're going to have a seam coming up there. Good. Another lesson. Okay, so this is an area I'm going to sew faster than I normally do on here because I can, and we don't want to stay here forever. People are like, well, maybe we do. But you want to take this nice and slow, make sure you're getting it nice and straight, okay? So don't worry, it's not a race. Take your time, practice this. This is I mean, it really is like learning how to do the binding is great. I think it's a great skill to have. Okay. Okay, are you getting the fact that I have my arm back there?
Yeah, and how much fabric is up on the table, how you're managing it. It's a lot of fabric to manage.
It's a lot of fabric to manage, and it really is, yeah, keeping it on the table and then keeping a hand back here, because the goal is to keep the fabric straight through the machine, and it naturally tends to want to do one way or the other. Okay, so now I'm at my seam in my binding. So I'm here, and I've got this little seam, and I'm going to try to press it open. Okay, it isn't super important that it be pressed open. I just want it to try to be a little bit flatter underneath there. So if it gets doubled up, it's just thicker, which isn't as much fun to sew. Okay, just sew it down, keep it in check, all that good stuff. Okay. So when you, so the binding, like I said, this is something that is, we have a couple other videos about it. We have the tip sheets. When you buy the kits, you'll always get enough for the binding in it. And it has a little tip sheet in there on how to sew the binding. But you definitely want to reference videos too, because it's much easier to see it happen. But the binding varies between kits too, because some of them have Luxe Cuddle and some of them have C3. Oh, look at that, we're almost to another corner already. Yes. Okay, you guys gotta watch it all over again. Okay. See, if we were in class, I'd be like, all right, raise your hand if you have. But I can't see your hands go up, guys. How about if you, I know a question to ask, because then you can tell me how the response is, okay? So tell me if you have bought a kit. So like push the little love button thing if you have bought a kit and it's just sitting in your closet. That's what I want to know. Because we always have a bunch of those, and I always think it's really fun to see. Okay, so I'm back at the corner, about a 1/2 inch. I'm going to pin it in place. Okay, I'm going to come up to that corner.
Yeah, there were a bunch of hearts that came.
There were a bunch of hearts.
Maybe a dozen.
Yeah, good. But now you guys are learning the skills so that you can actually make it. Okay. We've got it. We've got the time.
There's another dozen.
Okay. It happens a lot. Like, you know, I always say, like, you know, you see it at the store, you touch it, you pet it, you think it's wonderful, it's so soft, and then you get home and then you're scared to death of it. I totally get that. Okay, so we've done the same thing, stitched along, did that little corner off. Okay, I'm just going to pull this up. Keep my finger here, pull it back. And I'm going to throw this up on the table because it's a lot and it's heavy. So it wants to pull away from me and make it more difficult for me to do, and I don't want that. So I'm going to put the weight up on the table because, like I've said, it's heavy stuff. It tends to weigh it down. And I want to mess you up a little. Okay. All right, my allergies are kicking in. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to see if I can give that a little shove. So you can see I had to help it just a little bit. One of the things that you can do there if your machine struggles is that you can use a leader ender. And then once you sew that on and you sew a little bit, you have something to sort of keep some tension on. So that works well. Move that, and I'm going to do a couple of clips in here.
Karen bought her kit 5 years ago. It's
nice.
Still sitting beside the sewing machine.
You can use it as a little a comforting device, though. Just reach over and pet it every once in a while. Someday soon, you can get to it, I promise. Keep watching the videos. You'll feel super confident, and then you could do it. Yeah, people buy them and then leave them a lot. They're so pretty. Yeah, I had a customer recently reach out because I'm the one who answers the consumer questions, and she had questions on a kit that she had bought, and I didn't recognize the name, and it found out it was like from 12 years ago. She's had it for a very long time. It happens. No guilt, no shame. Just make it someday. Because someday it'll be so far in the past we won't have any idea what that was. But all our kits are put together basically the same way, and we have all different sizes. So if you're interested in trying them, there's lots of shops that carry them. We have a shop locator on the website where you can find places that carry them. And the wee ones are the smallest ones. So wee ones are, so I definitely wouldn't suggest that you start on a big one. You can, just be really patient with yourself. But the wee ones are really good, and it's what we usually use in class because they're 27 inches square. It's just a little thing. You practice all the techniques, and then when you're done with that, you can tackle a big one. Okay, so you can see these larger clover clips. I like them because they hold down a lot more. Somebody in a class, actually at the Quilted Crow in, I'm not going to remember the name. Sorry, it's in Kansas. Somebody will pop up with it. Quilted Crow. But anyway, when I was there, one of the ladies was using these, and I was like, oh, that's a really good idea, because you can see how much further it holds down. When my seam allowance is going to be here at the 1/2 inch, This barely holds it to the 1/2 inch, so it tends to be a little bit wigglier. So these work, and it's what I've used for the past, 3.5 years, but I found that these actually work really, really well. So I can't remember who it was that had done it in class, and I was like, oh. But I thank her because it was a great idea. And I already happen to have these because, we buy tools and we think we know what we're going to do with them and then we don't ever use them. That's what I did with that. Yes, I'd bought these and then never had used them. All right, we're going to keep on going. Felt a little funky. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't pulled up weird back there. Okay, I'm coming to another join soon. Okay, just keep going. All right, so now we're going to come up to this little joint. So this is a good place to use that Wonder Clip because it'll hold it flat, and I can get it closer to the machine. Okay, it'll sort of do a little double duty for me there. So the first part is to get this side to go underneath and then to feed it under all the way. Take that out. You can use pins for that too. So anytime that you need to use, so Wonder Clips and pins work pretty interchangeably, except that pins will hold it much more tightly, permanently. So I use them in places, as you see, like when I really don't want it to move. And if it can move a little bit, I'll use the Wonder Clips. Okay, so I'll get a little bit closer and then I'll put my pin in. So this is definitely a place where you could use your little ruler, put it up here and measure your 1/2 inch. Like I said, I'm pretty okay with eyeballing it. You might be too. Okay. Do one more. And then I'm going to flip it and sew right off the corner. Okay, so I'm literally just sewing right off the corner. This one has the little line, so that's all I do is I just line that baby up with that and sew right off. Oops. Okay, there we go. All right, so now, oops, take that out. Do the same thing. We're going to flip it up, flip it down. Okay. So if you're struggling with this at all, the thing that I like to do is I hold it here and I'll put my finger here and then pull it back tight on it. Okay, that was how I learned how to do it, so that it was the right tightness basically. So you can see that that raw edge is poking out past the fold, and it's really important to get a nice mitered corner. Because the great thing about this is once you flip around to the other side, if that miter isn't perfect, we're totally fine, unless it has the pocket, and we really don't want that pocket on there. Okay, so I'm gonna put some more clips. Get these in here, and then we can sew again. And so this means we're on the 3rd side, is that right? It just keeps going. So there's 1, 2, 3. All right. Yep. 3rd side. All right. Let's do it. Okay. We talked about it yesterday. I'll reiterate the dryer trick because you guys won't ever be able to see me do that one. Sorry. Is that when you're doing this, so when you're cutting the bindings is the same way. So when you buy a kit, I always recommend that you cut out all the pieces first, and then you're going to throw them in the dryer with a wet washcloth. We like to call it the dryer trick, but it's a good one. It's a good one, and it works really well to get all of the fuzz off. So you saw how I just vacuumed it up. But throwing it in the dryer will do the same thing. So I don't have a dryer in my house, but you probably do. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut everything, put it in the dryer, no heat, and a wet washcloth. It's really important to keep that wet washcloth because otherwise it just builds up static energy in there, which doesn't help. So we want to get the static off and get all of that fiber to end up in your lint trap, and then clean out your lint trap. Okay, it's really important that you do that anyway. But if you add Cuddle to it, just clean it out right then. Okay, so one of the things that happens that I could feel was happening there is it was trying to grab underneath here. So it's really important to make sure that you're getting all the layers when you're clipping it. That's a fairly common oops. And then what happens is it shoves that one piece of fabric over, and then yeah, and then it doesn't work right. So You have to take it out. And even though you guys saw, it's not that hard to take out. Okay, it's probably one of the biggest misconceptions is it's terrible to take out, but only if you're doing it the traditional seam ripper, one thread at a time thing. Okay, so don't do it that way. Get a blade. If you can't find that little blade at your local quilt shop, there are definitely ones that are online that have them. And for some of the techniques, you can just use a box knife, but it definitely doesn't work as well for the cutting. But a blade is just really good. Famore makes one that's a seam ripper that's a scalpel style seam ripper, and that one works pretty well too, especially for taking out ripping the seams. Yeah, has a little crook on it. All right, so we'll keep on going. Any other questions, guys? Let me know. Okay, otherwise I'm just gonna like talk random stuff at you. I hope you're okay with that. Has anybody said, can she just be quiet and sew? No. If I were Jenny, I would sing to you, but I'm not Jenny, so yeah. All right, remove these. Whoop. Add some more clips in. Hey, oh, I'm getting there. All right. It's always so exciting when it comes around. You're like, oh yeah, there is a finish to it. Well, this is a pretty big one too. So like I said, this one is 40 by 60. Somebody asked yesterday if they came bigger than this, and I don't know that they do. I think the pre-printed battings, this is the size that they are, is 40 by 50. You could make it smaller, especially like the square in a square. When I made it, I thought about not putting those end pieces on. So you can always manipulate it like that, but yeah, I think they're 40 by 50. They've also got, like I said, a tree skirt, stockings, placemats. I probably wouldn't use Cuddle for a placemat, but for the stockings and for this tree skirt, it'd be super duper cute. And we've got a bunch of new holiday prints that are coming, so.
I don't know if we've got a plan for this yet, but Cheryl wants to know what's for dinner.
What's for dinner? I don't know. I mean, last night we had steak, so otherwise I'd be like, yeah, we're having steak tonight. But no, I haven't planned it. Last night I planned. Sorry. It's funny because I traveled. It's now in the past tense, isn't it? I traveled so much that like I wasn't home and cooked a lot. And so I was very excited to plan meals and cook for the first little while that I was home. And now I'm like, oh, I have to do this? I don't know. Let's have cereal. I used to tell my kids that when they grew up and out that I would live off cold cereal. So I kind of think about it sometimes. I wonder if that's the answer. Okay, let's see. We've got one more stitch. Okay. All right. You can see the little corner. I'm going to sew right off of it.
What was the name of that quilt shop in New York City, down in Manhattan, that...
Candy Quilters?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Candy Quilter?
Somebody was saying that they're from New York City and there are not too many quilt shops in Brooklyn. But I'm like, you go down into Manhattan and Candy Quilting.
Yeah. Yep. She's over there, and yeah, I don't know if any others. I think City Quilter closed. It was down there. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that Candy Quilter is, or Candy Quilting? I can't remember. Candy Quilts? Candy something.
I have one of their water bottles, but
yep.
I can't go get it right now. My hands are full.
But they're over there. Yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, the bigger cities are harder to find the quilt shops, so small towns are a little bit easier sometimes. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are on and I took this pin out because it was stabbing me. So normally there would be a pin right in here. So what I want to do is I want to stick a pin back in here, because what I want is to come down to here and stop, and then I'm going to put my tails together, and then my tails are about the same length. It's easy enough to do. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, I'm going to stop here. So that's what this pin is telling me, is stop here. All right, so I'm just going to add some clips, and I'm going to sew down to that pin. Okay, and I just want to get to this point that I can sew it all on and show you guys how I combine the ends, and then how we do a little bit of the top stitching. And And then you don't have to watch me top stitch the whole thing, because that's just an end. And then I'm like, yay, I have a finished quilt, which I'll show you next week. And next week it should be in our new little studio, I hope, too.
Carol asked about, she remembered from last week, we talked about the fact that we might get to talk about the Ascension quilt today. And we're going to postpone that till next week when all of our new studio is up and running and we've got a little bit more clarity.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And I haven't shaved, so we're not turning the camera around.
So let me know if you guys heard that all, because I'm not sure how much the microphone picks up, but hopefully all of that. But yeah, we'll do that next week with the Ascension quilt. We'll talk about it. We'll show it to you and we'll get more detail into it. Because yeah, and I still have to like put the top stitching on the pillowcase. It's been a week. Okay, so now I am here. I'm going to move this. Okay, I'm going to take my little pins out because at the corners I left some of the pins in. I want to make sure that I've got those all out so I'm not stabbing myself anywhere. Okay. So there's another one. I'm going to take that out. So now we're back at the beginning. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this so that it's a little bit easier. Okay, so I've got my tails, and this one is an extra long tail. Okay, so I just want to chop it off, and that's what I'm going to do if I can find some scissors. Okay, so then I'm just going to cut this with the little scissors. If I can get them to, there we go. Okay, and so this, if you can see, this is just, I just do teeny tiny stitches. These are the little femoral snips I have, but it ends up not losing a lot of hair that way because you're just cutting through the backing. Okay, so it's not really, I don't like to use it for when I'm doing long strips. So like if I'm doing the binding strips, I would much rather cut it with the blade because that's so much faster. But if the blade scares you or you don't have very good grip or you know, shake a little bit, the scissors will work just as well. You just want really sharp ones, and you're just going to do the same thing as just little teeny tiny little snips, okay? So this is another way of doing that same idea where you're not going to cut all of the nap on the front, but you're going to have less mess, and is much easier than using, or much less mess than using a rotary. Okay, so now I've got my tails and I've got the two pieces, okay? So it's sewn all the way around. And I've got my two tails and I need to combine them. So the cheap and easy way of doing it would be to stick these together, sew along here, and then flip these out. But then you end up having a really thick part here that it ends up doubled up thick because you've brought it around, so it's like so many layers of Cuddle that it's really hard to sew. So there are a few other ways of doing it. I have a couple of techniques. Okay, so one of them, I'm going to show you all of them so that you can decide or practice or whatever what you want. So I need a few pins. Okay, and I'm going to put one up and one down. Okay, so if you want to try to come in here, yeah, get over the top as much as possible. So what I want to do is this is going to be where my seam is. So Cuddle is really thick, and so it's got a lot of nap. So what we want to actually combine are the back ends, the backing. So if I push this down, those touch each other. But if I lay them down, they're still apart. So when I lay them, I always put them so that they're apart because I've got so much fluff on all the sides that I can make those work. So what I do, and I've done this a lot so I can totally do it, is I hold these in place and I come under here. So this is underneath the little flap. Okay, I come under here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab that fold. So I'm just going to feel it. Then I flip this over and I pin it. Okay, so now that's where my seam's going to be. Okay, so at this point, I know that's where my seam's going to be. It will be flat. So I'm going to put it here. I'm going to pin here. And take another pin and pin here. So I don't move that middle pin because it will shift on me if I take that out. It will move. Okay, then I can take this out and then I would sew between these pins just like I did the binding strips. Okay, so at that point, then my seam allowance is right where I marked it with the pin. It'll flatten out and be fine. All right, that little holding it thing is hard though for people, so I get it. So I have another way. Okay, so I'm going to fold one up, fold one down. Part of the trick here too is to make sure that you have left yourself long enough tails. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5-ish. Okay, so usually I say 8 to 10 inches, and so that's about what will make it a little bit easier for you if you do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, instead of pinning from one to the other, I'm going to hold this and I'm going to pin inside that fold. Okay, this is totally done by feel, is that I have to feel where the fold is. I'm going to do that there. Make sure it doesn't move off my 45-degree angle there that I'm trying to get. I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, so now these will go together. That's my seam line. I'm going to move this, and you'll see every time I have to move the fabric and bring those closer. So then at this point I can feel those in there, and I just do it until basically they're kissing, and then I can take this out, and then I'll take one of these, I'll pin it here, and then I can take this out and sew between. Okay, so that's another variation. All right, and then there's this one. So last one. Let me see if I can find a scrap of my stuff. Okay, there we go. All right. That's a terrible scrap. I don't want that one. Sorry, that was a very miscut scrap. Okay, so then the other one is I'm going to put these here. So I'm going to lay these out so that they are, come on, turn for me. There we go. Get that nice and flat. Lay these along here. I'm going to lay these on top of each other. Okay. So then I'm going to take, this is the scrap that I cut off. Okay, and I'm going to cut this one here, and then I'm going to cut this one under here. Okay, so what I'll do, whoopsie. So what I'll do first is I will use my little scissors. Okay, and let me see if I can find my Sharpie, because I'll be happier if I draw a line. Okay, so what I want to do is draw a line right here, and that's where I'm going to cut that. Okay, so if I follow this line, it's better for me than just eyeballing it. Okay, so now I've got that length, so this one needs to be cut the width of that piece. So this is a total like quilting technique too. So I can line these up. It's a little bit hard for you guys to see. And then what I do is I give this a little bit of a tug. Okay. And then I can mark this again. So generally what I do is I try to make it just the tiniest bit shorter than that. So this overlap piece is 1 3/4 inches. And just shy of it, because like I said, I just pulled this just the tiniest bit so that when it comes back together, it should be a good fit. Because it's a knit and we're working with the fluff, there's a little bit of leeway in it. Okay? So now I'm going to combine those the same way that I would do it if I were doing the binding strips. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to overlap them. Pin them on either side. Okay, and now when this opens, it'll go back on there. It won't do it right now, obviously, because I've pinned it. The biggest thing is to double check that when you do this, that this is going to come down and across here. Sometimes I get a twist in it. So if you're not careful when you're pinning it, you can get a little twist. So make sure that you sort of do a double check and make sure that it's going to come along here, up and over and down here. Okay, I've done it too many times where I've messed that one up. All right. So now I'm going to mark this from corner to corner. And so I'm actually going to do a little tick right here at the corner because it's hard to see through the other side. Okay, and then I can use a little ruler here. Okay, and mark my measuring or my sewing line. Okay, I'm going to try to get another drink and not spill it all over myself. Okay. All right. So let's move this back over. We're going to sew that little bit and then we'll check it. So this is a time to be really careful. You can see there's a whole lot here that needs to be sort of wadded up so that I can get this close to my machine. So for me, this is like one of the harder parts is because all of this has to be right here. But if I'm careful with it, I can get it right and not have to redo this one. Okay. So I'm going to back stitch that because I want to make sure that it stays where I want it to. All right. And then I can check this. See if that worked? Close enough. Okay, that looks like a pretty good finish. So then I could just take and cut that off. Okay, and you could cut these off with your big scissors, with your rotary. Here, I'll just whack it off with the rotary so you guys can see that too. Okay, so there I'm there. Just whoop, okay, cut it off. Now it'll fit on there flat. So one of the things that I do, because sometimes, because like I said, this is fluffy and it's stretchy, sometimes it's hard to get it exactly where you want it to be. So this is a place that I will pin it. Okay. Because I want this to all stay in place where I have it. I don't want it to grow. And so if it's starting to grow a little bit and stretch a little, I want to make sure that I'm using my stiletto and really shoving it back into place. Okay? So the other thing that you can do is you can sew it from this side. So if this is actually a little bit loose, sew it from this side and just make this end match to this end of the seams. Okay? It's a little trick so that if it's a little long, it'll totally feed it in, because your feed dogs will always feed it faster than the top. It's just the way it is. There's a song in there somewhere.
That Jenny's going to have to sing.
Jenny's going to have to sing it, sorry. You do not want me singing to you. Okay. All right, only if we were on a Zoom call and everybody had to sing, then I would do it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna combine that end over, make sure that I'm getting this all nice and straight. Okay, make sure that this is staying on that edge, that my seam is open. Okay. Pin from that side so I can see it better. Okay, and then I'm just aiming for here. So I want to make sure that that stays straight along the edge, but then I want to aim for this. Okay, so I'm going to keep that flat as I push it under the needle. Okay, so that it doesn't get a pucker there. One of the great things, I'm just going to overlap it a little bit, take it out. One of the great things about doing it with the Luxe Cuddle fabric is that if you get a little pucker right there, because there was too much fabric, it actually won't show in the Luxe Cuddle at all. So that's fabulous. I'm going to grab these pins real quick. Okay. So that's one of the secrets for that, for the Luxe Cuddle, because if you get a pucker, you won't see it. If you get a pucker in the C3, you'll totally see it, okay? So we don't want that to happen. So now that I've gotten it all sewn all the way around, I've gotten those two ends stuck together, the whole thing is done. Now we're just going to top stitch it. So unlike traditional quilt binding where we would sew that on and then we would hand stitch that entire thing down, or we would machine stitch it very carefully with an edge stitch foot, we're actually just going to zigzag it down. Okay, so the way that I do that is I'm going to start up at a corner. I'm going to grab some Wonder Clips over here. I'm going to use my smaller ones this time, and I'm going to start up at a corner. Okay, and we're going to do one whole side with you guys in a corner, and then I'll let you be. Okay, so I'm just going to flip this over and clip this a little bit. It's not going to be perfect because I'm going to come back along and make it perfect, or as close to perfect as I can. Okay, I'm just going to pin some in here. So I'm going to start up here, and we're just going to zigzag all the way around this edge. Okay, ready, guys? Let's do this.
Was there any way to use a serger to do the first part of this binding process?
You could. You absolutely could. I just don't know that it would be any easier. So I actually don't use my serger very much with the Cuddle at all, and mostly just because I find that it goes faster than I can control it easily. And so for me, the going slower is worth it. So I like that better, but you could certainly give it a try. If you are more experienced at your serger, you might have better luck. Okay, so this is the part that I like to call blind sewing, because here is my edge under there. You can see my raw edge, but when I let this go so that I can sew it, it comes over here and looks like that, which is great because in the end, we're gonna make that fluff over just like that. But right now, I wanna be able to see it. So I'm gonna pin this or stab it over. Okay. do a little lock stitch, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that when my left side is coming over down the needle, that it should be landing about there. So let's do one more stitch so we can see. Boop. Okay, so that left needle, or the needle in the left position, is coming down just past this line. So what I'm doing with this is holding it just past that line. Okay, so let me see if I can do this. It's hard to show you and see it at the same time. So if I don't get it perfect, don't be mad. Okay, but I just call it blind sewing, where basically I'm just going to hold this over. I find where the raw edge is. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to stab it into place. I'm actually going to grab it a little closer because it's wanting to move away. Okay, and then I'm going to just aim for it and try to keep it in the right place. See if I can watch it from the camera. Come on, focus here, camera. Can see that. Oh, did you do it? No, doesn't want to focus for you guys. I'm sorry. Okay.
I got an idea.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to keep moving this over. Again, I've got it. So I'm just doing the zigzag because when you're doing a luxe cuddle, there is no reason to use any other sort of stitch. Okay, so if you use a serpentine stitch on here, it takes you longer, and then it just all hides in there, because that's the joy of luxe cuddle, is it just all hides. Okay, let's try this. Nope. Okay, so I'm going to stab this, move toward that. Okay, same idea. I can see my stitching line. I'm going to grab my fabric, bring it over here. Okay, and like I said, the goal is to get it so that when your left needle, the needle comes down on the left, that it's just coming just along that seam line. So then on the back, and we'll see in a second if it worked, that it stays, you know, mostly on your binding. Okay, because what we want is it to not show on the back of the quilt. We just want it to all hide in the binding. So let's see. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, so you can see the stitches here, how it's right in the edge of the binding. All right, so that's what we want, because then when we can do this, and it'll totally hide all those stitches. Okay, so even though I'm using the gray, you can't really see it. And then what I like, if you use the luxe and the luxe, is they sort of just blend along this edge, and then you can have it not be perfect, and it's fine. Okay, so we're just going to keep doing that. We'll get to the corner. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we're just going to sew right along here. I'm just going to keep doing it. So it's never a continuous little thing because I just keep having to move the fabric over. Oh, I should put some more pins in, or clips. Hold on. What happens, I've noticed that if I don't clip it, it tends to start stretching without me realizing it, and then all of a sudden it's really off, and I don't want that to happen. So sometimes I get lazy and then it bites me. Yep. Even I can get too lazy. Okay, so I'm just going to keep shoving that in. Here, I'm going to shove my little threads underneath that got caught.
Hi, Vicky from Scotland.
Hi, Vicky. Good afternoon, I think. Good evening. Evening, that's what it is. It's good evening. Yeah, I love seeing all the people from all over, so thanks for coming, guys. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I have a seam in here. So I stopped just before the seam. You could sort of see it, it's big and bulky right here. There's my little seam allowances hanging out. Okay, this is a part that I'm going to be a little bit extra careful, trying to make sure that all of that gets tucked underneath. Okay, so just going to sort of feel it, hope for the best. There's a lot of hoping for the best with this. Once you practice a little bit, that's what I was saying, like if you practice a bit, you can sort of get a feel for it and understand where the edge of the fabric is, but it definitely isn't something that necessarily you're going to get right the first time. So don't hold yourself to too high of a bar there, and practice. Okay, so once you get this binding down, man, everyone's so impressed. It's great. And you're like, oh, it's really easy. Okay, I'm going to come down here. We're almost to the corner. which is kind of exciting. Glad to get to show you guys this part. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing, grabbing my edge, make sure it's halfway near there. So like I said, 1 3/4 inches, that leaves a 1/2 inch seam allowance, half for the back, half for the front, and then 1/4 inch to go over the bulk of the blanket or the quilt. Okay. All right. So as I get up here, I'm just gonna get a little bit closer, and then we're actually gonna just fold this over. So I try to get a little bit closer just because it wants to stretch a little, and I want to give it all the chance to do that before I pin it. So now what I'm going to do, and I totally use my stiletto in this part, is that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to fold this over, and now I'm going to pin it. Okay, so if you don't have a stiletto that you can do it with, what you can do is you can turn this over, pin it, and then you're going to fold this up real hard and pin it. Okay, and this is the way that I found I can get the corners to turn out pretty darn well most of the time. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going. Come on, let's get stuck back there. All right, and then I'm gonna work my way toward the corner, being real careful of where my pin is. Okay, I'm gonna go forward a little bit, and then I'm gonna stitch. I'm going to turn, oops, ooh, I almost hit cut the thread one, that would have been bad. Okay, put my foot back down, and now I can put a few little clips in and keep on going. Okay, so I'm going to get to this point, then I'll pull it out and I'll talk to you just a little bit more, and then we'll sign off for the day. Okay, so I'm going to get, here's another seam. I'm just going to push it in place. So if it isn't perfectly even, you can really just sort of fudge it and it will be totally fine. So I'm going to take it out here. I'm going to talk to you guys about it, and I'll finish this up and we'll show you the whole thing next week. Okay, so the way that this works, you can see, if you want to go around to the other side, we totally can too. So you can see, here's the zigzags. We're just going to, and like, it's a really light thread. If I wanted to use a dark thread, it would totally hide in there, but I can come in there with that stiletto and I can just pull the fibers up and it totally hides it. So even though it's totally the wrong color, it absolutely works. This is the look that you're going for, though, is that you don't see the stitching. So even though it's actually top stitch, you can't really tell that it is. Okay? All right. So what was that?
They want to see it.
They want to see the whole thing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's not completely bound, obviously, but it's pretty darn close. We're like halfway. You turn it this way. Ta-da. Okay. In the back of it. Okay. And this is a situation where people always want to know if you need to quilt a little bit more, and the answer is no, because the manufacturer said this is how I can make the quilt. Okay, so I know that the manufacturer is confident that the quilting is not going to not let it fall apart. So it'll keep it all together just as it is. Make sure that you're always checking the batting recommendations for how much they want to quilt it. If you were doing this with a cotton fabric, you very well might want to quilt in there to add a little bit of oomph. If you wanted to do, this would be a great place if you have, if you want to do an applique of someone's name across here, that would be something that you could do, or you could do embroidery on here. There's lots of space for some playing with it, which is super fun. But this will be enough quilting for a cuddle quilt for sure. And that is actually really super cute. I'm really happy with it. Yeah, so I'll finish binding this up and then we'll be back next week. Like I said, there are more binding videos. There are a couple of them on YouTube that you can check out, as well as ones that are on Facebook. All right, we have a winner, I'm assuming?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Oh, okay, so winner is Ella Bly of Redding, California. I think that she and I just had a conversation about Cali Quilt Co. So that's kind of funny. I'm so excited for you. So thank you so much for coming, and thanks for always showing up. You're here a lot, and I appreciate it. So we will get you. So email or message us through the Shannon Fabrics page. Just send us a message, and I'll get it, or Ellen will. And we'll get your mailing address, and we'll send you one, and we'll figure out which one you want, if you want the sophisticated strips or if you want the square and a square. So thank you and congratulations. I'm always excited to have you guys here. Next week we'll be back, and we are doing the Nutty Nag. Oh, I almost forgot to talk about it. Oh, my sniffly little nose. My allergies are killing me. Sorry, you guys. So this is the Nutty Nag. I'm going to take this out here. Okay, we'll have some more information about it and what you're going to need. The pattern is made by a company called Rustic Horseshoe, which is in Arizona, I believe. And I first found this pattern when I was in Cottonwood at the quilt shop there that I was teaching at. And now the name has completely gone out of my head. I'm sorry. It's a quilt shop in Cottonwood, Arizona, and I saw this there, and that's when I bought this pattern because I was so excited by it. It was super cute. Let's see if it says here. Quilter's Quarters, says right on the bag where I got it. Quilter's Quarters in Cottonwood. And anyway, super cute little pattern, and she makes a ton of patterns that are just adorable. Next week I'll show you the stick horses if I can get them from the office, because she makes little stick horses with these cute little heads on them. We had them from market, and there's llamas and all sorts of things that she makes, a koala and lots of different patterns. So, but next week we're going to do the little horse because I think he's adorable, and I've wanted to make him since I bought this pattern last year in Quilter's Quarters. So we're going to make this one next week. Super fun. Look at the cute little variations on the back. Super cute, you guys. This is going to be fun. So I'm excited about it. We'll be back next week doing that one. We'll have giveaways for that. We're going to do it at least 2 days. We'll see. We might have to do 3, but we'll do at least 2. Oh, and also it includes templates and instructions to make it a donkey, a unicorn, or a Pegasus. Okay, I might have to make a unicorn. All right, so that's what we're doing next week, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget that you can join us on Facebook, on YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, all of that good stuff. You can follow Shannon Fabrics on all of those things. I'm out there too. We also have the I Love Cuddle group that is here on Facebook. We like to share our projects and what we're working on, and if you have questions, you can ask them. We're just a big community of people who love sewing with Cuddle. So come join us there, and until next week, happy sewing. Bye.